So when you guys are using DBT, one, what conditions would this be for to treat? And then two, how do you use this diagram to explain people for the first time what CBT is and why it works?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very basic diagram. It's super easy. You can use this with adults and children. So that's why I like it so much. And this works for, honestly, we get a lot of anxiety, but it works for depression. It also works for anger. It works for guilt. It works for a lot of different things. But in a nutshell, I tell them every single emotion has three components. So just like your body is made up of your arms, your legs, and whatnot, every emotion is made up of our thoughts, our feelings, our physical feelings. So it says emotion there, but that's kind of like the physical sensations in our body, and then our behaviors, what we think, what we do, and what we say. And so simplifying it, let's say we're anxious about social situations. Thoughts that go along with that would be, oh, what if they judge me? What if I make a fool of myself? What if I say something wrong? I know they're looking at me, that kind of thing. So those would be anxious thoughts. And then the sensations or the emotion of anxiety has a lot of things that go along with it, like increased heart rate, sweating, hyperventilating, maybe feelings of dizziness, maybe stomach butterflies or stomach aches. And you can tell that that kind of goes with anxiety. And then there are certain behaviors that go along with anxiety. In this case, avoidance. I might turn and run away from the party, or I might seek safety, as in I might only go with a safe friend, or I might look down, or I might not speak my mind. And what I would tell people is, you can see these are all connected. So the more anxious thoughts you have, like what if they reject me, the more you're going to feel that sensation of anxiety in your body, the more your heart's going to race, the more your breathing's going to increase, stuff like that. And the more that happens, the more that you're going to act on those anxious behaviors, or the more you have an urge to do those, to run away or to seek safety. And the connection goes in all directions. So it doesn't have to start with a thought. We might start to feel anxious, and then we start to avoid, and then we have more thoughts. Oh, they're going to reject me. They kind of go in all directions. So if we want to help have, more normative levels of anxiety, or if we want to help so that our anxiety is not interfering with our lives so much, it would make sense to tackle one of these components. And so I would tell them, so imagine I could just erase or put my hand over the thought section and say, you never ever going to have an anxious thought enter your brain again. You're never going to have a worry. How do you think that would affect your anxiety? And everyone says, well, I wouldn't have any anxiety. And I said, yeah, that's right. But now how easy is that? How easy is it to just not have an anxious thought? And people say that's pretty hard. And I say, yeah, it is really hard. And in fact, if I tell you, for the next minute, I'm going to time you, and you are not allowed to think about your feet. And I have a machine that can measure, and you're not allowed to think about your feet. So go, and inevitably what happens, right? A thought pops in there about their feet. Right? So I say, so you cannot actually control what thoughts pop in your head. In fact, the more you try not to think about something, the more you will. There are definitely things we can do with thoughts. We can definitely change our relationships to thoughts. We can shift our attention to different thoughts, but the original intrusive thought or the worry, we actually can't do anything about. So then I say, okay, so we don't have that much control over that. So let's go to the emotion, the physical sensations part. How easy is it to just not have your heart rate increase, or not have your perspiration increase, or to not get that stomach ache or those butterfly feelings? People say, it's really hard. I say, yeah. In fact, you can't do anything about it. It's a brain, your amygdala is firing, and it's firing that response. And once it fires, it's there. You can't control when that fires. Sometimes I will use an analogy, and I'll say, this is a trigger warning. So if you have trauma, I apologize. But, if I put a gun to your head and I say, you are not allowed to feel anxious, right? You're not allowed to have your heart rate increase and all of that. Otherwise, I'm going to shoot you. Obviously, I would never do that, right? It's just an analogy. I would say, so what happens? Like, oh my gosh, I'd panic. Absolutely, because there's a gun to your head. So, you can't control that. Even with your life on the line, like no matter how important it is, you can't control it. So yeah, there are things we can do to help manage if we're having panic. We can do mindfulness. There's relaxation techniques that can work at certain levels of anxiety. But overall, we don't have that much control over the emotional reactivity. So then, okay, let's go to the third aspect, which is our behaviors, the aspect of our emotions. And I say, okay, so when you're anxious, you want to avoid, right? You want to seek safety. Well, let's take that same gun analogy, pardon, but it's a good one. If I say, okay, I have a gun to your head and you have to walk into that party acting like a penguin. Otherwise, I'm going, or you have to walk like a penguin or something, right? What would you do if you don't, you're dead? Well, they would say, oh, it'd be really hard, but I would try to walk like a penguin, right? Absolutely. Yeah. So it would be hard, but you can do it. That's what you have the most control over. And so this is where we like to start. We obviously CBT, we look at thoughts, we can do things with them and our emotions, but where you're going to get the most bang for your buck, so to speak, especially with anxiety, is changing our behaviors. And that's where exposure and response prevention comes in, is we start with, okay, let's approach the situation instead of avoiding it. Let's touch germs and not wash our hands instead of doing everything not possible not to. Let's go to the party, but not bring the friend with me. And so we start to change behavioral patterns first, because that's what we have most control over. And then once we do that, some of those other things will fall in place. We might not have as many anxious thoughts because we learn that we can handle it and our fears don't come true. And then our brain learns, oh, look, she's going towards the trigger. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I don't have to fire that anxiety response. So everything else kind of falls in place.